The bizarre warship. Admiral Pollock cackled at the humans' ridiculously comical-looking ship as it led the charge against his mighty Draconis armada. The ship appeared to him as nothing more than a rickety assemblage of spare parts, welded to a junkyard scrap heap. Pollock looked back to the view screen, scrutinizing the peculiar vessel like a clueless child would examine a particularly difficult math problem. Nathan Miller, standing at the helm of the HSS Indomitable, stared out at the massive space battle unfolding around him. The human fleet was taking heavy losses, outmatched by the Dracon ships in every conceivable way. Their ships were larger, faster, and equipped with technology that made humanity's vessels look like ancient relics. Nathan's knuckles clenched as he watched a Draconis dreadnought effortlessly vaporize 3 human cruisers with a single volley. "Admiral, we can't sustain these losses. We need to fall back," the tactical officer called out, his voice straining over the din of the bridge. "All ships, fall back to the edge of the system and regroup." Nathan barked the order, his heart sinking as he watched his fleet scramble to retreat. Suddenly, the Indomitable shuddered violently as a Draconis energy weapon found its mark. Explosions tore through the ship, fires erupting across multiple decks. The force of the blast threw Nathan from his feet, his head cracking against a bulkhead. Everything went black. Nathan awoke in the medical bay, his head pounding. The ship's doctor leaned over him, her face grim. "Admiral, a third of the fleet has been destroyed. And the Draconis. They're bombarding the colony below. Millions are dead." Nathan struggled to sit up, his mind reeling from the scale of the defeat. Before he could even begin to process the loss, his communications officer burst in. "Admiral, incoming transmission from the Draconis flagship." Nathan staggered to his feet. "Put it through. You have lost, human. The Draconis will wipe your pathetic species from the stars and claim your worlds for the glory of our empire." Pollock's voice boomed. Nathan, his face bruised and bleeding, stared back defiantly. "We will never surrender." Pollock's laughter echoed through the bridge. "Then you will die." The screen went blank. Nathan limped to the window, watching helplessly as the Draconis ships relentlessly pounded the planet below. Billions of human lives hung in the balance, and he had just led his fleet to the most devastating defeat in human history. But as he stared at the odd little ship that had sparked Pollock's amusement, a desperate plan began to form in his mind. It was a long shot, 1,000,000 to 1 odds, but it was humanity's last hope. Weeks dragged on, each day bringing fresh reports of Dracan victories and human defeats. Nathan paced the bridge of the Indomitable, his once pristine uniform now wrinkled and stained. The Draconis were relentless, striking at human colonies and outposts with impunity. The fleet was in shambles, barely holding together. The comm officer's voice cut through the gloom. "Admiral, priority message from Earth. It's marked top secret." Nathan hurried over, hope and dread warring in his chest. He scanned the message, his eyes widening with each line. A team of Earth's top scientists had developed a weapon that could change everything, but it was mounted on the HSS Absurdity. "What the hell kind of name is that?" Nathan muttered, reading on, his incredulity growing. The ship was described as a haphazard collection of mismatched parts, earning it the dubious title of the stupidest warship ever seen. But if the message was to be believed, this ridiculous vessel held the key to humanity's salvation. Nathan set course for the rendezvous point, pushing his battered ship to its limits. When they finally came in sight of the Absurdity, he could only stare in disbelief. It was even worse than he had imagined. The ship looked like it had been assembled by a mad junkyard artist. Wings jutted out at odd angles, weapons were mounted seemingly at random, and the hull was a patchwork of different metals. Nathan boarded the Absurdity, his boots clanging on mismatched deck plates. He was greeted by Dr. Erickson, the lead scientist. "Admiral Miller, welcome aboard," Erickson said, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "I know she doesn't look like much, but the Absurdity is our best hope." Nathan eyed a nearby bulkhead, which appeared to be made out of old car doors. "Doctor, I'm going to need an explanation. How is this thing supposed to help us win the war?" Erickson grinned. "The ship's design may seem chaotic, but that's precisely the point. By defying conventional spacecraft engineering, we've created a vessel that can channel and amplify the power of our new weapon, the quantum flux disruptor." Nathan looked out the viewport, where the distant flashes of Draconis weapons fire could be seen. His fleet was out there fighting and dying. He had led them into this war, and now he had to lead them out, even if it meant putting his faith in this absurd ship and its untested weapon. "All right, Doctor. Let's power up this quantum flux, whatever it is, and show the Draconis what humanity is made of." As the absurdity's engines hummed to life, Nathan could only pray that this gamble would pay off. If it didn't, there might not be a human race left to save. The quantum flux disruptor. The absurdity tore through space, its mismatched engines roaring as it hurtled toward the Draken fleet. The enemy ships hung in the void like a swarm of angry hornets, their sleek hulls bristling with weapons. But as the absurdity drew closer, the Draconis formation began to waver. "They're breaking off," the sensor officer shouted, disbelief etched on his face. "They're actually running." Nathan stared at the view screen, hardly able to believe his eyes. The mighty Draconis, who had smashed through human defenses like they were made of paper, were fleeing before the absurdity like frightened children. "Now's our chance," Dr. Erickson yelled over the din of the bridge. His hands flew over the controls, and the ship shuddered as the quantum flux disruptor came to life. A strange, pulsing glow emanated from the absurdity, washing over the Draken ships. The very fabric of space seemed to ripple and distort around them. And then, to the crew's amazement, the enemy vessels began to come apart. It was as if an invisible hand had reached out and started crushing the Draconis ships. Hulls crumpled and twisted, bulkheads collapsed, and escape pods were sent tumbling into the void. In a matter of moments, the once formidable fleet had been reduced to a field of shattered debris. The bridge erupted in cheers as the crew realized what they had just accomplished. They had done the impossible. They had turned the tide of the war in a single stroke. But Nathan didn't join in the celebration. His eyes were fixed on the sensor readouts, a feeling of unease growing in his gut. He knew the Draconis too well. They wouldn't take a defeat like this lying down. His fears were confirmed a heartbeat later. A massive shape emerged from hyperspace, dwarfing the absurdity with its sheer size. It was a Draconis dreadnought, the personal flagship of Grand Admiral Pollock himself. "Human." Pollock's voice boomed over the comm, filled with rage and contempt. "Did you think your little toy could save you? Surrender your ship and its technology to the Draconis Empire, and I may grant you a quick death." Nathan's fingers tightened on the armrests of his chair. He could feel the eyes of his crew on him, waiting for his command. He drew in a breath, then nodded to Dr. Erickson. "Charge the disruptor," he ordered, his voice steady. "We're not going down without a fight." Erickson nodded and began the power-up sequence. The ship thrummed with energy as the weapon prepared to fire. But something was wrong. Alarms blared throughout the bridge as the disruptor readout spiked wildly. "It's overloading," Erickson shouted, his fingers flying over the controls. "I can't stabilize it." Nathan opened his mouth to give the order to abort, but it was too late. With a blinding flash, the quantum flux disruptor exploded. The absurdity lurched and spun as the blast wave tore through its hull, sending debris and bodies tumbling through the corridors. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut, sealing off the breached sections of the ship. The crew scrambled to contain the damage, fighting fires and sealing leaks. But as Nathan staggered to his feet, he realized with a sinking feeling that their one hope for victory had just been lost. Klaxons wailed and emergency lights flashed red as the crippled absurdity drifted helplessly. Pollock's dreadnought loomed over the stricken vessel, a boarding tube slamming into its hull with a resounding clang. Draconis shock troopers, clad in jet-black armor and wielding plasma rifles, surged through the breach. Their reptilian eyes gleamed with malice as they stormed through the corridors, their boots pounding on the deck plates. The humans opened fire, energy bolts and bullets ricocheting off bulkheads. The air filled with the acrid stench of burnt flesh and ozone as the two sides clashed in brutal close-quarters battle. Nathan led a small team towards the ruined quantum flux disruptor, desperately hoping to salvage something from the wreckage. They crept through smoke-filled passages, stepping over the bodies of fallen comrades. Suddenly, a plasma bolt sizzled past Nathan's head. Pollock emerged from the shadows, flanked by his elite guards. The Draconis opened fire, the narrow corridor erupting into a storm of energy beams and flying shrapnel. Nathan's team fought back ferociously, but they were outmatched. One by one, they fell, cut down by the relentless Dracon onslaught. Soon, only Nathan remained, his armor scorched and his face streaked with blood and sweat. Pollock strode forward, a cruel smile on his reptilian face. Nathan charged, a primal battle cry tearing from his throat. The two leaders clashed in a whirlwind of strikes and parries, their armor shattering under the brutal impacts. But Pollock was too strong, his cybernetic enhancements giving him an overwhelming advantage. With a final crushing blow, he sent Nathan crashing to the deck, barely clinging to consciousness. Pollock loomed over Nathan, his plasma blade crackling with deadly energy. He raised the weapon high, ready to deliver the killing stroke. Suddenly, a lone human soldier, little more than a boy, launched himself from the shadows. He slammed into Pollock, sending both of them tumbling to the ground. They grappled furiously, the plasma blade slashing through the air mere inches from Nathan's face. In a final desperate move, the young soldier wrenched the blade from Pollock's grasp. With a roar of defiance, he plunged it into the Grand Admiral's chest, the white-hot plasma piercing Pollock's heart. Pollock slumped to the deck, his eyes going dim as the life drained from his body. Nathan staggered to his feet, staring in disbelief at the fallen Draconis leader and the young hero who had saved him. All around the ship, the tide of battle turned. The humans, inspired by Nathan's resolve and the fall of Pollock, fought with renewed determination. Step by step, deck by deck, they drove the Draconis borders back until finally, the invaders were forced to retreat to their own vessel. But even as the immediate threat receded, Nathan knew that the battle was far from over. The quantum flux disruptor was destroyed, and the Draconis would be more determined than ever to crush humanity. The war had only just begun, and the path to victory would be long and hard. The crystal's secret. As the dust settled from the fierce battle, Nathan and Dr. Erickson picked their way through the twisted wreckage of the Absurdity's innards. Sparks showered from ruptured conduits, the acrid stench of burnt circuitry hanging heavy in the air. Dr. Erickson nodded grimly, his eyes scanning the debris. Suddenly, he froze, his gaze locked on a faint glow emanating from beneath a pile of shattered bulkheads. "There!" he exclaimed, scrambling over the rubble. Nathan followed close behind, hope and trepidation warring in his chest. Together, they heaved aside the twisted metal, revealing a small crystalline object pulsing with an otherworldly light. Dr. Erickson carefully lifted the crystal, his hands trembling slightly. Nathan stared at the crystal, a glimmer of hope kindling in his eyes. "Can we rebuild the weapon with this?" Dr. Erickson hesitated. "Possibly, but it will take time, and the Absurdity is barely holding together as it is." "We'll split the crew," Nathan decided. "One team stays here to guard the crystal and repair the ship. The other takes a shuttle to link up with the nearest human fleet and bring back reinforcements." Dr. Erickson nodded, already moving to secure the crystal in a reinforced container. As the crew hurried to prepare for the dangerous missions ahead, none noticed the Draconis spy lurking in their midst, his reptilian eyes glinting with malice. Hours later, as the shuttle carrying half the crew sped away from the crippled Absurdity, a massive Draconis fleet emerged from hyperspace, dwarfing the human ship with its sheer size and firepower. "Attention, humans!" A cold, imperious voice crackled over the comm. I am Grand Admiral Zortex. You have something that belongs to the Draconis Empire. Surrender the crystal, and I promise you a swift death." Nathan's eyes narrowed as he stared at the view screen, filled with the Draken Armada. He had no intention of giving up the crystal, but with the Absurdity's weapons offline, he knew they stood no chance in a head-on fight. "Load the crystal into an escape pod," he ordered, his voice tight with tension, "and assemble a volunteer crew. You'll be leading the Draconis away from the Absurdity while we get the ship back online." The young cadet who had slain Pollock stepped forward, his eyes blazing with determination. "I'll lead the mission, sir." Nathan clasped the cadet's shoulder, a flicker of pride in his eyes. "Good luck out there. The fate of humanity rests on your shoulders." As the escape pod blasted away from the Absurdity, the Draken fleet surged forward, their weapons charging. On the bridge of the Absurdity, Nathan and the remaining crew worked feverishly to bring the ship's systems back online, sweat pouring down their faces. Suddenly, the Absurdity's engines roared to life, the ship shuddering as power surged through its battered frame. Nathan's eyes locked on the view screen, where the Draconis ships were closing in on the escape pod. "All weapons, fire at will," he roared, and the Absurdity leaped forward, its guns blazing as it charged into the heart of the Draconis fleet. Explosions blossomed in the void as the human ship drew the enemy's fire, buying precious seconds for the escape pod. The Absurdity shuddered under the onslaught, its hull buckling and twisting, but it held fast, its crew pouring every ounce of their skill and determination into the fight. And then, just as the Draconis ships were about to overwhelm the pod, it vanished, leaping into the safety of hyperspace with the precious crystal aboard. On the bridge of the battered Absurdity, Nathan sagged back in his chair, his face etched with exhaustion and grim resolve. They had bought time for the crystal to escape, but at a terrible cost. Sparks showered from shattered control panels as the Absurdity limped into the docking bay of the human outpost. The once proud ship looked like a battered relic, its hull scorched and pitted with blast marks. Weary crew members staggered down the boarding ramp, their faces etched with the strain of battle. Nathan strode into the command center, his jaw set with grim determination. Holographic displays flickered to life around him, each one bearing dire news. Draken fleets rampaging unchecked, human colonies falling like dominoes, casualty reports scrolling by in an endless litany of loss. "We can't keep going like this," Nathan growled. "We need a game changer." "Nathan, I've been analyzing the crystal from the quantum flux disruptor. Its properties are extraordinary. When exposed to a specific quantum frequency, it can generate localized distortions in space-time." Nathan leaned forward, his heart pounding. "Are you saying we could create a wormhole?" Erickson nodded. "Theoretically, yes, but the power requirements would be immense. We'd need a ship that could withstand the stresses of wormhole travel." Nathan's gaze drifted to the Absurdity, its mismatched hull plates gleaming under the hangar lights. A slow smile spread across his face. "I think I have just the ship in mind." The next days passed in a frenzy of activity. Engineers swarmed over the Absurdity, retrofitting its patchwork systems with makeshift wormhole generators. Nathan and Dr. Erickson worked tirelessly, calibrating the crystal's quantum frequencies and reinforcing the ship's structural integrity. But as the final bolts were tightened and the last welds cooled, an urgent message flashed across the command center screens. The Draconis had discovered the location of Dr. Erickson's research facility. A massive fleet was en route, determined to capture the crystal and crush humanity's last hope. Nathan gathered a small team of volunteers, each one ready to lay down their lives for the cause. They boarded a sleek combat shuttle, a prototype wormhole generator strapped to its hull like a ticking bomb. As they streaked towards the research facility, Nathan's mind raced with the weight of what they were about to attempt. The odds were stacked against them, the risks unimaginable, but he knew they had no choice. The fate of humanity hung in the balance. The final stand. The shuttle dropped out of hyperspace into a maelstrom of fire and destruction. Draconis ships swarmed around the research facility, their weapons pounding its shields with relentless fury. Nathan's team plunged into the fray, their own guns blazing as they fought to draw the enemy's attention away from the fleeing researchers. But even as they fought with desperate courage, Nathan knew that it was only a matter of time. The Draconis were too many, too powerful. And then, like a nightmare made manifest, a massive dreadnought emerged from the void, its guns locking onto the facility with implacable purpose. In that moment, Nathan knew what he had to do. With a fierce battle cry, he wrenched the controls of the shuttle, sending it hurtling towards the dreadnought on a collision course. His team fought on, their weapons firing until the barrels glowed white-hot, buying him the precious seconds he needed. Nathan leaped from the shuttle, the prototype wormhole generator strapped to his back. He hurtled through the void, his suit thrusters flaring as he closed the distance to the dreadnought. The ship's point defense guns swiveled to track him, filling the void with a hurricane of fire. But Nathan didn't falter. With a final defiant roar, he slammed into the dreadnought's hull and activated the wormhole generator. For a single, breathless moment, the universe seemed to hold its breath. And then, with a blinding flash, a massive space-time distortion erupted around the dreadnought. The mighty ship shuddered and bucked, its hull plates twisting and warping as the wormhole tore it apart from within. Explosions chained through its superstructure, consuming it in a maelstrom of fire and shattered metal. Nathan vanished into the heart of the inferno, the wormhole collapsing behind him in a final cataclysmic burst of energy. The corridors of the absurdity rang with a deafening silence as the crew grappled with the loss of their leader. Commander Alexei Ivanov strode onto the bridge, his face etched with sorrow and steely resolve. He knew there was no time for mourning. The Draconis threat loomed larger than ever. "Listen up," Ivanov barked, his voice cutting through the somber atmosphere. "Nathan gave his life to buy us a chance. We're not going to let that sacrifice be in vain." He turned to Dr. Erickson, who clutched the glowing crystal in his hands. "Doc, can you use this to create a wormhole big enough for the absurdity?" Erickson nodded grimly. "It'll be risky, but I believe it's possible." "Then that's our plan," Ivanov declared. "We're taking the fight to the Draconis homeworld." The bridge erupted into a frenzy of activity as the crew prepared for their most audacious mission yet. Engineers swarmed over the ship, reinforcing its hull and modifying its systems to withstand the rigors of wormhole travel. In the lab, Dr. Erickson worked feverishly to harness the crystal's power, sweat pouring down his face as he fine-tuned the quantum frequencies, aligning them with the ship's wormhole generator. "It's now or never," he muttered, inputting the final commands. The absurdity shuddered as the wormhole tore open before it, a swirling vortex of shimmering energy. Ivanov gripped the armrests of his chair as the ship plunged into the maelstrom, the stars stretching into long, distorted streaks. Moments later, the absurdity burst from the wormhole, emerging in the skies above the Draconis capital. Alarms blared as the ship's sensors detected scores of enemy vessels rising to meet them. "We're not here to conquer," Ivanov told them. "We're here to take out their leadership and end this war." The Marines nodded, their faces set with determination. They knew the odds were against them, but they were ready to fight to the last. The absurdity shook as Draconis fire raked its shields. Ivanov ordered a return volley, the ship's guns thundering as they saw out enemy targets. "Prepare for ground assault," he commanded. Drop pods blasted from the absurdity's launch bays, hurtling towards the planet's surface. Ivanov's team slammed into the streets of the capital, emerging from their pods with weapons blazing. The air sizzled with plasma fire as the Marines clashed with Draken forces. They fought their way through the city, blasting through barricades and storming fortified buildings. As they neared the Imperial Palace, a hail of enemy fire forced them to take cover. Ivanov peered around a shattered wall, his eyes widening as he saw the figure leading the Draconis defense. Grand Admiral Zortek stood at the head of the Royal Guard, his armor gleaming in the smoke-filled light. He roared a challenge, brandishing his plasma blade. Ivanov signaled his team to press the attack. They surged forward, engaging the Royal Guard in brutal close-quarters combat. Ivanov fought his way towards Zortex, dodging and weaving through the chaos. The two leaders met in a clash of blades, their weapons flashing and sparking as they dueled across the palace steps. Zortex pressed his advantage, driving Ivanov back with a flurry of powerful blows. But Ivanov refused to yield. He counterstruck, his own blade humming as it sliced through the air. The battle raged around them, Marines and Draconis guards falling on all sides. Just as Zortex seemed poised for a killing blow, a massive explosion shook the palace. High above, the absurdity unleashed the full might of its wormhole generator, the fabric of space-time rupturing under the onslaught. The palace walls buckled and cracked, throwing Zortex off balance. Ivanov lunged forward, his blade finding its mark. With a final, gurgling cry, Zortex tumbled from the roof, his lifeless body smashing onto the courtyard below. Ivanov staggered to his feet, his armor battered and scorched. Around him, the Royal Guard lay defeated, the Draken forces scattered and broken. From the depths of the ruined palace, a figure emerged, hands raised in surrender. It was the Draconis Emperor, his regal bearing shattered by the weight of defeat. "Enough," he said, his voice trembling. "The war is over. The Draconis Empire yields to the human alliance." Ivanov nodded grimly, accepting the Emperor's capitulation. Marines secured the area as medics tended to the wounded, the smoke of battle still thick in the air. The absurdity sliced through the void of space, its patchwork hull a testament to the battles it had endured. In the month since the war's end, Captain Ivanov and his crew had been tasked with hunting down the scattered remnants of the Draconis military, a duty they carried out with grim determination. Aftermath and new threats. On the bridge, Ivanov pored over a holographic map of the sector, his brow furrowed in concentration. Red markers denoted known Draconis holdouts, each one a potential target. "What about this one?" he asked, pointing to a marker orbiting a distant moon. "Looks like a staging ground for hit-and-run attacks on civilian convoys." Lieutenant Zara Krell, a former syndicate operative turned ally, leaned in for a closer look. "Good eye, Captain. That base has been a thorn in the side of local trade routes for weeks." Ivanov nodded, his decision made. "Set a course. It's time we paid them a visit." "Return fire," Ivanov barked. "Get our Marines to the drop pods." The Absurdity's guns roared to life, filling the void with searing beams of energy. Explosions blossomed as fighters disintegrated under the onslaught. In the drop bay, armored Marines piled into their pods, checking weapons and sealing helmets. Sergeant Arnov, a grizzled veteran of the war, gave a curt nod to Ivanov over the comm. "Ready to give them hell, sir." The pods streaked towards the moon's surface, trailing plumes of fire. They slammed into the rocky ground, hatches blasting open as the Marines stormed out, weapons at the ready. The Draconis base was a maze of fortified bunkers and gun emplacements. The Marines advanced under heavy fire, taking cover behind boulders and craters. "Flank left," Arnov shouted over the din of battle. "Suppress that turret." A squad broke off, hurling grenades and laying down a withering hail of fire. The turret exploded, showering the area with molten shrapnel. Inch by hard-fought inch, the Marines pushed forward, blasting their way into the heart of the base. Draconis soldiers fell before their advance, scaled bodies shattered by bullets and blades.